believe. But there's so many questions we need to ask.
I've already formed the view.
I could just add quickly to that water quality issue, if allowed to. I mean, Faith will be able to give you some very good information on that. She's an expert on that particular aspect. One other additional thing to realise when these fish die, they profusely leak blood. So there'll be lots and lots of blood in the river as well. And Faith done some quick calculations, and she concluded, or she inferred, that the quality of the water of the Murray-Darling system, if this was to go to plan, would be comparable to sewage in terms of the levels of different nutrients in the river. So that's something also to bear in mind.
Well, while you're on that subject, could you just touch on the prospect of botulism and just see if you can, in a minute or two, tell us, I understand how botulism occurs, but can it then, if we had a flow event, do you know what the life cycle of around botulism is and whether it can travel 100 kilometres downstream? I mean,
I can't really comment on botulism, so it's outside my expertise.
Yeah, it's a little out of my expertise as well, but botulism occurs in the rotting fish. So wherever these are decomposing, there is high potential for it to occur, and that could be spread by birds as well and other wildlife that contract it, and this can be passed on through the food chain.
well, more importantly, if properties along there are relying of stock are naturally watering on the river, or estuaries off the river, or they pump the water out of the river to go up into to reticulate it around 100 troughs over the next 40 kilometres. If botulism has a life longer than, if it has a life that would allow it to remain active until it got into those farm systems, I mean, we'll lose hundreds of thousands of head of cattle if that happens.
Yes, I'm not sure of the life cycle of botulism, but as far as I'm aware, that could be it would have some life cycle outside of a decomposing fish.
Mm. So if botulism outbreaks occurred in the river system, who would be between yourself, Ms. Coleman, and Dr. Lowe to answer the question about what happens next? Does it flow down the river? Can it be reticulated in irrigation? Not irrigation, but water supply to cattle?
I guess cattle are highly susceptible to botulism. The botulism that the fish will initially produce is the type E toxin, which only affects fish and birds. But as birds come into it, also will affect humans. But if birds eat the rotting fish and then they subsequently die, they will likely produce botulism type E toxin, type C, sorry. And the type C is the one that kills cattle and sheep, horses, and a whole heap of different birds.
Various forms of the botulism toxin have been used as a terrorism tool. You can extract the toxin and use it to put into waterways to poison populations.
So how long does it last for?
It lasts for quite some time. I don't know the exact time. However, I do know it outlasts many of our water filtration systems, which take some days to go through. So it lasts for a reasonable amount of time. It will degrade, but it will...
but does it need an organic host? So if I pump it up to a tank and it goes down into the mud in the bottom of a turkey's nest or a tank, can it live there longer?
There's two separate things here. One is the toxin produced by the bacterium, and the other one is the bacteria itself.
Yes.
So the bacteria can survive in sediment, yes, anaerobic sediment, but what's of concern to those of us around the table is the toxin generated, which is separate. All you need is the bacteria. The toxin lives on beyond the bacteria.
In water? It needs a water host?
It needs water, yes, as far as I know.
And so birds that might water where that toxin is, or cattle that water, it'll kill them?
Most bird kills that have been associated with botulism have been associated with fish kills and those birds eating the fish. That is the most direct method.
We're about to do this on a massive scale.
At that scale, I haven't seen a comparative scale to that.
No, but one would accept one would expect,
Yeah.
Ms. Coleman, that it would be catastrophic to bird populations.
It could be. Many of the biggest bird kills in Australia have been attributed to botulism
Yeah.
and fish kills.
And with stock, if we take that water from the river and pipe it to troughs or tanks, if they ingest the toxin, is that sufficient for them to become ill?
That would be a question for Richmond, and he appears to be looking that up at the moment. I think some of the other concerns are equally as bad. Things like hemorrhagic E. coli is quite dangerous to humans in very small quantities. Falling into wetlands down at Greenfields in South Australia caused several members of council staff to end up in hospital due to hemorrhagic E. coli in the sediment at the
So
base.
if we have botulism then, and we have a bit of a flush in the river and it moves down to where there might not be a massive population of dead carp, but it gets to a swimming hole 5 or 6 kilometres down in a shallow, kids jumping in the river, ingesting water, is that a health risk to humans?
It's probably less the botulism and more the E. coli and some of the other diseases that would be an issue.
Tell me this, and then I'll move on, because these things make me cranky. The people that we have in charge of this project must know the potential of these things. This seems like science 101, is it not?
Absolutely, it's
So they must
fundamental
know.
ecology.
They must know. They must either be ignoring it, or they're themselves looking at trying to model up what the potential of this is. I mean,
The study that they have conducted, which relates to human health impacts, focuses primarily on the direct infectivity of the virus itself to humans, rather than the secondary infections and so on. I believe that they have now slated potential additional research to cover those elements, but the study that was that's currently on the books was not designed to evaluate those.
well, my final question, what could ever be in their mind not to look at something in the risk profile as it would seem as evident of this potential? What could...
I would agree with you.
Okay, all right, send a problem. Sorry.
I raised the issue of hemorrhagic E. coli with the National Carp Control Program staff 2.5 years ago, or whenever it was that this started 2 years ago, at a meeting at Meningie. So it was raised before the scope of the studies came
What was
out.
the response you got, Ms. Coleman?
That it was fascinating and we should talk more. But And I have discussed it several times since. In fact, my latest conversation, I raised this in the Your Say discussions online because I just wasn't getting an adequate response, and I live on this river, and the response I got was a discussion about a study that the New South Wales Water Authority did in their reservoirs with some little microcosms, some little tanks, and because the tanks without a bottom deform, as we all know, they had to put a base in them. And so I was told by the researchers it had no access to sediment, this particular study, and these are all sediment-borne diseases. But that study was used to prove to me in an email that they'd done a trial and none of these pathogens had been at a risk.
This is in fish tanks?
Basically.
Aquariums or something?
But no, big water tanks with the bottoms cut out of them and put into a reservoir. But they'd had to put a base into them, which I've been told was a geotextile bladder of some variety. And because that's slightly permeable, apparently they somehow had contact with the sediment. But I'm yet to get a clear answer about that one. You either have contact with the sediment or you don't.